Well, happy Sukkot. And if you didn't realize it yet, we're in the Jewish New Year, 5780. So happy Rosh Hashanah. And a few days ago, too, was Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Learned some new things with my family this year on Yom Kippur. But today, all week this week is Sukkot, which is the festival of Tabernacles, the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Ingathering. There's different names for it, but basically it commemorates the time when the Israelites were traveling in the wilderness, living in tents, and also kind of previous to that when Abraham was living in tents. So I had some verses that I thought I'd share with you. I've done just some study over the years of the different festivals, and just to try to bear some meaning for Christians, especially on this time of year, and how it ties into where we're at. So the whole concept of dwelling, of where we live and where God lives, is called kind of all intertwined in Sukkot. And I think it's just a beautiful picture, a wonderful picture of God's presence with us. Hopefully this sound is coming in clear. This is kind of an experiment, doing it from my computer here. So I guess the first place to start would be where God told the Israelites to celebrate this festival. In Deuteronomy 16, verses 13 and 14, it says, "Another celebration, the festival of shelters, must be observed for 7 days at the end of the harvest season, after the grain is threshed and the grapes have been pressed. This will be a happy time of rejoicing with your family." So Sukkot, it's the first stopping off place for the Israelites on their journey out of Egypt, is at the time of the Exodus. And it's the name Sukkot is explained in Genesis 33, verse 17. It says, "And Jacob journeyed to Sukkot and built for himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the place is named Sukkot." So the Hebrew word Sukkot is actually plural. It's the plural of the word sukkah, and sukkah means like a tent. Now, you'll see traditionally in Judaism today that they have an observance of creating a little tent outside of their home and sleeping under it. We're not doing that this year, and we don't typically observe that, but we do observe the spiritual significance behind it and the meaning behind it, which has to do with God's dwelling place. And if we trace the place of where God dwelt, of course, in the Old Testament, he dwelt in the tabernacle, and then in the temple. And then in the New Testament, that transition to where his dwelling place is in the hearts of men. He dwells in the hearts of people who believe in him. Interesting point I learned this year during Yom Kippur, that in the Gemara, which is a part of the Talmud, it states that a miracle was performed every year on Yom Kippur, when the priest would enter into the Holy of Holies and he would sprinkle blood on the mercy seat for his own sins and for the sins of the congregation, for the whole people. There was a red cord that was hung outside of the tabernacle or of the temple. And every year that he would go in there and sprinkle blood on the mercy seat, that red cord would miraculously turn white. And it would happen every year that he would do that. And it was God's sign to them that he had accepted their sacrifice, and that their sins were forgiven, that they were cleansed white as snow. And that miracle happened every year until around 30 AD, which, of course, if you know from history, is around the time that Jesus died and when he rose again, when he himself became the ultimate sacrifice for sin, then God no longer accepted the sacrifices that were being offered in the temple. And this troubled the religious leaders enough that they wrote it down in their history inside the Talmud. Of course, not explaining from the messianic perspective that Jesus, Yeshua, actually fulfilled that, the sacrifices. So I just want to read some passages that have to do with the Sukkah, have to do with the tent, and the dwelling place of God, and the dwelling place of people. So in Hebrews 11, he lists different people of faith, and starting in verse 8, he talks about Abraham. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents, that is Sukkot, with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. So he was looking for a city that wasn't really created yet, but he was looking by faith, looking for a city whose builder and maker is God. And isn't that a picture of what we're doing as Christians? We're looking toward the New Jerusalem that it talks about in Revelation, that city whose builder and maker is God. We're not looking just at these earthly cities and these earthly realms. We're looking toward an eternal heavenly city. So some of the other places from the Old Testament I thought were kind of neat that use that Hebrew word sukkah or Sukkot. In Psalm 27, verse 5, he says, "For he will hide me in his shelter, in the day of trouble. He will conceal me under the cover of his tent, his sukkah. He will lift me high upon a rock." So we find that in God's tent, in his shelter, we find his protection, his guardianship over us. Psalm 84, verse 1 is another really great place that a lot of people know because of the song that's been developed from it. It says, Psalm 84, verse 1, "How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts. My soul longs, yes, faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and flesh sing for joy to the living God." So we observe how amazing, how beautiful, how lovely is the place that God dwells, that God chooses to dwell, whether it was, in the tabernacle in the Old Testament or the temple, or now the place that he dwells, he calls lovely, the place inside the hearts of people. We can see that God says that we're lovely, that we're beautiful, that our hearts are lovely, that because he's given us new hearts, he's given us new minds, he's made us new creation, and calls that dwelling place lovely. In John chapter 1 in the New Testament, we see this really amazing picture of Yeshua, of Jesus. In verse 1, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And some, might wonder, well, who is the Word? And if you look down in verse 14, it says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." So we know that the Word, the Logos Word, became flesh, that Jesus became flesh. He emptied himself of his godly attributes. As it says in Philippians, he didn't see it as something to be held on to, but humbled himself and became obedient. He took on the form of a servant, And it says here that he became flesh and dwelt among us. We have seen his glory. The glory is of the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. So Jesus tabernacled among people. He tabernacled among men. Then in 2 Corinthians, let's go to Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 2, 22. It starts to elaborate on what I was talking about before, how God transitioned where he dwelt, no longer in buildings, but he dwells in the hearts of people. In Ephesians 2:22, in him you also are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. So not only does he dwell individual believers, individual Christians, but he indwells the corporate body, the whole body of Christ, as they're being built together, as it's being brought together, as more and more people are coming to know and believe in Jesus, that they're all being fit together as a dwelling place for God by his Spirit. And it highlights this also in 2 Corinthians 4. 2 Corinthians 4, verse 16. So we do not lose heart, though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. For we know that if the tent that is our earthly home is destroyed, and he's talking about our bodies, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this tent we groan, longing to put on our heavenly dwelling, if indeed by putting it on we may not be found naked. For while we are still in this tent we groan, being burdened, not that we would be unclothed, but that we would be further clothed, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. He who has prepared for us for this very thing is God, who has given us the Spirit as a guarantee. For we are always of good courage. We know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. Yes, we are of good courage, and we would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord. He's saying we'd rather, in our spirits, would rather be in heaven and not have to, fight against sin and evil in this world. But he says, so whether we are at home or away, we make it our aim to please him. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or evil. So it's an amazing concept that God would choose to dwell among us, dwell among men, dwell inside of us. And I hope you have a wonderful Sukkot. And this week, just think about God's presence with us, Emmanuel, as he came to dwell in us and with us. And I think that that's one of the pictures that's throughout the whole of the Bible, is a theme that runs throughout the whole thing, is that God is with us, Emmanuel. Through all the trials and troubles and wars and rumors of wars, that God is with us. Lovely is your dwelling place, Lord Almighty. My soul longs and even faints for you. Lovely is your dwelling place, oh Lord saints flow. There is one day in your courts, there is one day in your house, there is one day in your courts, and thousands elsewhere. Better is one day in your courts, better is one day in your house, better is one day in your courts, and thousands elsewhere, thousands elsewhere. The thing I ask, I will seek, see your beauty, find you in place your glory dwells. The thing I ask, I will seek, to see your beauty, find you in place your glory dwells. Better is one day in your courts, better is one day in your house, better is one day in your courts, and thousands elsewhere. Better is one day in your courts, better is one day in your house, better is one day in your courts, and thousands elsewhere. My heart and flesh cry out for you, the living God. Your spirit's water to my soul. I've tasted and I've seen. Come once again to me. I will draw near to you. I will draw near to you. There is one day in your courts, there is one day in your house, there is one day in your courts, and thousands elsewhere. There is one day in your courts, there is one day in your house, there is one day in your courts, and thousands elsewhere, thousands elsewhere. Just want to pray a blessing over anyone who's watching. Lord, I pray for your glory to fill them right now. I pray for your love overflow on them. Holy Spirit, come and fill them right now. Let them feel your presence and fire around them, God. Touch them right now. Show them how close you are to them. Open their hearts, open their spiritual ears to hear you, to hear your voice right now, calling them. Says many are the thoughts that he thinks towards you. They outnumber the sand on the sea. I love you. Hope you have a great night and a great week this week. And happy Sukkot. Sukkot Sameach.